and warriors. 10 Breton surnames that reveal your ancestor fled Roman Britain. If your last name is on this list, your ancestor didn't just live in Brittany, they fled to it, across the Channel. And warriors, in open boats, carrying nothing but their language, their saints, their laws, and the memory of a Celtic Britain that was burning behind them. And warriors. These 10 surnames survive from one of the most dramatic mass migrations in the history of the ancient world. A migration that has no monument, no museum, no Hollywood film, a migration that most people alive today have never heard of. And warriors. And yet it created an entire nation. It planted a Celtic language on the soil of northwestern France that is still spoken today. It named the rivers, the hills, the villages. And warriors. And the people of a peninsula that the Romans called Armorica and the refugees renamed Little Britain, Brittany. The families who carry these names are the descendants of the people who left. And warriors, who crossed the sea when the legions withdrew and the Saxons came, and Britain stopped being the place their ancestors had built across 4 centuries of Roman peace. And warriors, who arrived on a foreign shore with a Celtic tongue and a warrior tradition and began again. Most of them have no idea their surname is a message sent across 15 centuries. And warriors, from a Britain that no longer exists to a Brittany that is still here, stay until number 1, because that surname belongs to a warrior dynasty whose leader carried the title of king. And warriors, who commanded the migration itself and whose bloodline the Breton genealogies trace in unbroken descent from the last Celtic kings of Roman Britain. The next surname looks French at first glance. And warriors. It has the French definite article, the French construction, but the word inside it is not French at all. And warriors. Pull it back into the Breton Celtic language and you find a description so precise that it tells you not just who your ancestor was, but what they looked like when they stepped off the boat onto the Armorican shore 1400 years ago. And warriors. Number 10, Le Bihan, from the Breton Bihan, meaning small or little, the small one. And warriors. A physical description that became a family name in the Breton Celtic tradition because the words that described people most precisely in the language they had carried from Britain became the words that identified their families permanently. And warriors. The Breton language is the only Celtic language spoken on continental Europe today. It did not arrive in Brittany through gradual migration or cultural diffusion. It arrived all at once, and warriors, in the 5th and 6th centuries, carried by refugees from southwestern Britain, particularly from the territories we now call Cornwall, Devon, and Wales. And warriors, who crossed the Channel in such numbers that they replaced the local population's linguistic identity almost entirely. The surnames that emerged from this Breton Celtic world carry the fingerprints of that replacement. And warriors. The word Bihan is cognate with the Welsh Baichan, the Cornish Baigan, and the Irish Beag. The same Celtic root, the same meaning. A linguistic thread connecting Brittany to Britain across 15 centuries and the width of the English Channel. And warriors. If your name is Le Bihan, your bloodline carries a Breton Celtic word that was already ancient when your ancestor used it to describe themselves on a foreign shore, the same word their cousins were using in Cornwall. And warriors, the same word. Different coast, one people. Number 9 carries a name that is unmistakably, completely, irreducibly Breton. A name that could not have been produced by any other linguistic tradition in the world. And warriors. That announces its Celtic origin and its Breton specificity simultaneously. Number 9, Cavarec, from the Breton Care, meaning village, settlement, or fortified homestead, and Varec from Barrack, and warriors, meaning capable, skilled, powerful. The settlement of the capable one, the homestead of the warrior. The Breton Care prefix is the direct linguistic equivalent of the Cornish Tre and the Welsh Care, and warriors. The same Celtic root, the same meaning. When the British Celtic refugees arrived in Armorica and began naming the places they settled, they used the same linguistic system they had used in Britain. And warriors. The landscape of Brittany is covered in Care names. Caervignac, Caerluan, Caermorvan. Every one of them is a linguistic monument to the migration. Armorica in the 5th and 6th centuries was not empty land waiting for settlers and warriors. It had its own population, its own Roman administrative legacy. The British Celtic migrants, who arrived in such numbers that they renamed the peninsula, did not simply settle peacefully, and warriors. They organized, they defended, they fought, and they established their language and naming traditions with the thoroughness of people who had nowhere to go back to. If your name is Kervarek and warriors, your bloodline built settlements in a new land with the same hands that had defended the old one, the capable ones, the warriors who became farmers who remained warriors whenever they needed to, and warriors. Number 8 carries the name of one of the most celebrated figures in the entire history of the Breton migration, a name that appears in the founding legends of Brittany itself. And warriors, in the genealogies of the earliest Breton kings and in the historical record of the migration that created a nation. Number 8, Conan, from the Brittonic Celtic kunos, meaning hound or warrior, and warriors, through the personal name Conan, meaning high or eminent, the high hound, the eminent warrior, a name from the deepest layer of Celtic personal name tradition, where the hound was the loyal, and warriors, fierce, relentless hunter whose qualities every Celtic warrior aspired to embody. Conan Meriadoc is the founding figure of Breton legendary history, according to tradition recorded in medieval Breton chronicles and in the Welsh Mabinogion and warriors. Conan was a 4th century British prince who led the first major migration of Britons to Armorica and founded the dynasty from which the Breton ruling families claimed descent. Multiple Breton counts and dukes bore the name Conan, Conan I, and warriors. Conan-ni rulers of Brittany, who fought against Frankish encroachment with the same stubborn territorial determination their ancestors had displayed against the Saxons before the crossing, and warriors. If your name is Conan, your bloodline carries the name of the man who, in legend and possibly in history, led your ancestors across the sea to begin again, the hound who found new ground, and warriors, and held it. Number 7 is a name that takes you directly to the bardic tradition of Celtic Brittany, and warriors, a name rooted not in warfare or settlement, but in the cultural power that the British Celtic migrants considered as essential as any sword to the survival of who they were. Number 7, and warriors, Gelenek, from the Breton gwellen, meaning rod, staff, or reed, combined with a suffix indicating association with that quality. In the Breton bardic tradition, the one who carries the rod of authority, and warriors, the staff of the poet-priest, the wand of the Celtic bardic tradition that survived in Brittany long after it had been suppressed elsewhere. The Breton bardic tradition, the Barzoneg, and warriors, was one of the most significant cultural inheritances the British migrants brought with them. In Celtic Britain, the bard was the keeper of genealogy, the recorder of law, the voice of communal memory, and warriors, the British Celtic refugees who crossed to Armorica brought their bards with them because without the bards, the memory of who they were would dissolve within a generation. The Breton language preserved this bardic tradition in the Gwersua and warriors, the long narrative songs that recorded historical events, genealogies, and the traditions of the migration itself. Some of these songs carry linguistic features that connect them directly to the Brittonic Celtic of Roman Britain. And warriors, if your name is Gelenek, your bloodline carried the cultural memory of a Britain that was ending and planted it in a Brittany that was beginning. The rod bearers, the ones who kept the songs alive so the people would remember who they were, and warriors. Before we continue, if you're finding this useful, subscribe to Bloodline Decoded. Every week we uncover the history hidden inside the names people carry without knowing what they mean. And warriors, hit subscribe and the next video will already be waiting for you. Number 6 carries a name that places your ancestor at the most literal point of the Breton migration story, at the crossing itself. And warriors. At the moment when the boats had been built, and the people who were leaving Britain stood on a southwestern shore and looked south across the water toward a land they had never seen, and warriors. Number 6, Trodec, from the Breton Trodeg, meaning crossing, passage, or ford. The crossing. The one of the crossing, a name that commemorates not a place of settlement but the act of migration itself. And warriors. The moment of departure, the water between. The crossings that created Brittany were not single events. They were a sustained movement across multiple generations, from the mid-5th century through the 6th century and into the 7th. And warriors. Driven by successive waves of pressure, the Saxon advance, the collapse of Roman order, the plague of Justinian that devastated the West in the 6th century, the wars between British Celtic kingdoms that followed the Roman withdrawal, and warriors. The sea between Britain and Armorica is not benign. The channel is shallow and turbulent, subject to sudden storms, crossed by powerful tidal currents that can overwhelm a heavily loaded open boat in minutes. And warriors. People died making these crossings. Families were separated, boats were lost, and still they came, because what was behind them was worse than what might happen at sea. If your name is Trodek and warriors, your name is the crossing itself, the moment your bloodline left one world and entered another, still carrying everything that mattered, still arriving. Number 5 is a name that connects directly to the Breton Celtic saint tradition. And warriors. The extraordinary proliferation of Celtic Christian saints that the British migrants brought with them and planted across the Armorican landscape so thoroughly that Brittany today has more local saints than any other region of France. And warriors. Number 5, Bodilis, from the Breton bod, meaning dwelling or abode, and Ilis, a saint's name possibly connected to the Latin ecclesia, the church, the dwelling of Ilis, the settlement of the saint. And warriors. The Breton parish system, the plough system, was one of the most distinctive legacies of the migration. Each plough was named for the Celtic saint who had established the Christian community there. And warriors. Pludalmazo, Plouguenot, Plouazel, every Plough name is the record of a British Celtic saint planting a cross in Armorican soil and declaring, "This community is under my protection." And warriors. The village of Bodilis still exists in Finistère, the westernmost department of Brittany, in the territory most densely settled by British Celtic migrants, and where the Breton language survived longest and strongest. And warriors. Its parish church, built on early medieval Celtic Christian foundations, stands as a monument to the saint cult tradition the migrants established. If your name is Bodilis. And warriors. Your bloodline maintained the Celtic saint tradition in Brittany for 15 centuries. The families who kept the faith that the migrants carried across the channel. Still lit. And warriors. Still named, still theirs. Number 4 goes to the architectural legacy of the British Celtic migration, a name that marks a family connected to the building of Brittany, the construction of the great Breton manor houses. And warriors. The fortified enclosures, the care estates that dominated the Breton landscape across the medieval period, and that still stand today as the most visible physical monuments to the civilization the Celtic migrants built. And warriors. Number 4, Cergine, from the Breton cer, meaning fortified settlement or homestead, and Jean, the French form of John, a Christian personal name absorbed so thoroughly into Breton naming tradition that it fused seamlessly with the Celtic cer prefix. And warriors. The fortified settlement of Gin, the homestead of the family of John, the Château de Cergine, built in the 16th century in Saint-Vougué in Finistère, is one of the finest examples of Breton Renaissance architecture in existence. And warriors. But the name Cergine is far older than the chateau. The cer names of Brittany go back to the earliest period of settlement. And warriors. When the British Celtic refugees were building their first homes in Armorican soil with the same Celtic vocabulary their cousins were using in Cornwall and Wales simultaneously. And warriors. The Cergine families held their care across the medieval period, through the Duchy of Brittany, through the French annexation of 1532, through the Revolution. And warriors. Through the linguistic suppression of the 19th and 20th centuries that nearly killed the Breton language as thoroughly as the Saxons had nearly killed the British Celtic language 14 centuries before. And warriors. If your name is Cergine, your bloodline built in Brittany with the same hands that built in Britain. The fortified settlements are still standing. The name is still there, still Celtic, and warriors. Still Breton, still holding the ground your ancestors claimed when they crossed the water. Number 3 carries the name of one of the earliest and most historically documented kings of the Breton migration, and warriors. A ruler whose name appears in chronicles written within living memory of the events they describe, who governed one of the first territorial kingdoms the British Celtic migrants established in Armorica. And warriors. Number 3, Riwal, from the Brittonic Celtic Rigo Valo, meaning royal valor, or Rhi Wal, meaning royal leader, king of the wall, the chieftain who holds the boundary, a name constructed from the two most important concepts in Celtic kingship, and warriors, royal authority and the defense of the frontier. Rhiwal, recorded in the Breton chronicles as a king of Domnonay, the northern Breton kingdom, was among the first-generation rulers of the migration. And warriors. His kingdom takes its name directly from Dumnonia, the Celtic kingdom of southwestern Britain. Covering what is now Cornwall and Devon, they named their new kingdom after their old one. And warriors. They planted the name of the land they had lost in the soil of the land they were building. This naming practice is one of the most poignant features of the Breton migration. Domnonay in Brittany for Dumnonia in Britain. And warriors. Cornouaille in Brittany for Cornwall in Britain. Leon in Brittany possibly for Caerleon in Britain. The Celtic refugees built their new homeland in the image of the old one. And warriors. Naming it with the names of what they had lost so they would never forget what they were trying to preserve. If your name is Rhiwal or Rhiwalen, your bloodline carries the name of a king who held the boundary between Old Britain and New Brittany. And warriors, who ruled the frontier, who built a kingdom in the name of the one that had been taken. Number 2 belongs to a name that stands at the absolute pinnacle of Breton political history. And warriors, a name carried by the man the Breton people call the father of the nation, the ruler who unified the scattered kingdoms of the British Celtic migrants, defeated the most powerful military empire in Europe. And warriors, and established the independence of Brittany as a political fact that would survive for 7 centuries. Number 2, Nomino, from the Brittonic Celtic, with scholarly debate over the precise etymology. And warriors, a name uniquely Breton, found nowhere else the absolute linguistic signature of a people who had created something new from the materials of what they had left behind. Nomino, and warriors, who ruled from approximately 826 to 851, began as a local Breton lord appointed by the Frankish Emperor Louis the Pious. And warriors. Within a decade, he had turned against his Frankish masters and in 845 defeated the Frankish army of King Charles the Bold at the Battle of Ballon, the most significant military victory in Breton history. And warriors. The Battle of Ballon established by military fact that Brittany was a distinct political entity that the surrounding power had to negotiate with rather than simply absorb. Nomino died in 851 while on campaign deep in Frankish territory. And warriors. Still fighting for Breton expansion. His son continued the war. The independence he had won lasted until 1532. The families who carried Nomino's name across the medieval period were announcing the most important political fact in Breton history, and warriors, that the descendants of the British Celtic migrants had not simply survived, they had thrived. They had fought the greatest power in Europe and won. If your name is Nomino or Nomino, and warriors, your bloodline carries the name of the man who made Brittany a nation, who took the refugee settlement and turned it into a kingdom, who defeated an empire and handed his people 7 centuries of independence. And warriors. And now number 1, this surname, in its Breton form, carries a history that spans both sides of the Atlantic simultaneously. And warriors. A name present in the genealogies of the British Celtic kingdoms before the migration and in the founding dynasties of Brittany after it. A name whose Y chromosome lineage, confirmed by genetic studies, and warriors, represents one of the largest traceable bloodlines in the entire Atlantic Celtic world. Number 1, Morgan, from the ancient Brittonic Celtic Mori Janos, meaning born of the sea, and warriors, or sea-born, sea warrior, the one born from or belonging to the sea, a name that predates the migration by centuries, carried in the British Celtic royal tradition, brought to Armorica by the migrants, and warriors, and maintained in the Breton Celtic world across 15 centuries. Morgan is present on both shores of the Channel, because the people who carried it were present on both shores, and warriors. In Wales, the Morgan dynasty gave their name to Morgannwg, the kingdom now called Glamorgan. In Cornwall, Morgan appears in the genealogies of the Dumnonian ruling families in Brittany, and warriors. Morgan appears in the records of the earliest Breton kingdoms as a name of nobility, of warrior lineage, of connection to the founding generation of the migration. The sea is not incidental to this name, and warriors, it is the name. The Brittonic Celtic people of the Atlantic coast were a maritime civilization. Their warriors raided by sea, their saints crossed by sea, their refugees fled by sea. And warriors. The sea was not a boundary, it was a road, and the Morgans, the seaborn ones, were the families most completely identified with that road. And warriors. Genetic research on Atlantic Celtic populations has identified Y chromosome haplogroup R1b lineages that trace back to the pre-Roman Bronze Age populations of the Atlantic coast and survive at high concentrations in Brittany. And warriors. Cornwall, Wales, Ireland, and the Basque Country. The Morgan families on both sides of the Channel share genetic markers that predate the Roman conquest, predate the migration, and warriors, and connect the living descendants of the Breton Celtic world to the deepest layer of Atlantic European prehistory. Not legend, genetics, written in chromosomes that were ancient when the Romans arrived, and warriors, still readable today. 10 surnames, 10 families, 10 corridors leading back through the grey water of the English Channel, through the open boats of the 5th century carrying everything a people could carry when they had to leave. And warriors, through the Kerr settlements built on Armorican hillsides with Cornish hands and Welsh memories. And warriors, through the saint cults that kept the Celtic faith burning in a land that had never heard of the British Celtic saints before the migrants arrived and named the parishes after them. And warriors, your name is not just Breton, it is a crossing, it is a kingdom lost and rebuilt, it is the proof, written in linguistics and genetics, and the unbroken survival of a Celtic language on the soil of France. And warriors, that a people who had every reason to disappear instead decided to begin again. They crossed the water, they named the land, they built the churches and the manors and the bardic traditions. And warriors, they kept their language alive through Frankish pressure and French annexation and revolutionary suppression and the indifference of the modern world. And they are still there. And warriors, still Breton, still Celtic, still speaking, some of them, in a language that is the last living voice of the Britain that the Saxons ended. Drop your surname in the comments. Tell me if your family carried a Breton name across France. And warriors, across the Atlantic, to Quebec, to Louisiana, to wherever the French-speaking world spread itself and took its Breton Celtic surnames along for the journey, because those stories are the continuation of everything on this list. And warriors, if you made it to the end of this video, subscribe to Origins, Decoded. Every week, another name, another bloodline, another history that nobody told you was yours.